How beautiful are we when we don't fit in, when we stand out, when we celebrate our difference, when we're at our most unique and at our queerest. No, I did not watch the Oscars, but yes, I did follow on social media the next day. And to me, this was the best part, to see Billy Cooper walk down that red carpet wearing the tuxedo dress. And what I loved most about this is he said, very specifically, he said, I am not in drag. He said, oh, Billy Porter, I said Billy Cooper, sorry. I'm not in drag, I am a man wearing a dress. He is a man wearing a dress, reveling in his uniqueness, reveling in his difference, reveling in that which makes him an image of the divine, which is not the same as everybody else. Yes, Billy Porter is transfigured. And in his transfiguration, so are we, because all of a sudden, we're allowed to be different too. And I think of a little boy who might be watching this image and saying, I want to wear a skirt as well. I want to be different too. And actually, I know a little boy just like that. And now, he can. Don't be ashamed of what makes you different. Flaunt it. That's your divine gift. That is what transfiguration is all about. Now, Moses in this passage is absolutely changed when he meets the divine. His face shines, he can't hide it anymore. He stands out, and then he covers himself with a veil. Now, this is a really strange reading. And in none of the biblical commentaries that I researched before I wrote this, did I see anything about the fact, one slight mention of it, that a veil is a piece of women's clothing, that no man in the Middle East wears a veil, that this is bizarre behavior, that this is different, that this is queer, that this is Moses maybe coming out of the closet in more than one way. Never was that mentioned. But when we start thinking with theological eyes and ears and hearts and souls and minds that are a little bit queer, maybe we see it a little bit differently. Because why would he put on a veil to cover up his shining face? Think about it. Like, that's a way of standing out. That's not a way of hiding. That's a way of standing out. That's a way of saying, here I am. It's like Billy Porter. And then there's John Lennon, that is, not the other John, and his definition of what a revolution is. I've been thinking about this song for a while. I don't know why. But here are the lyrics, read. Say you want a revolution. Well, you know, we all want to change the world. You tell me that it's evolution. Well, you know, we all want to change the world. But when you talk about destruction, don't you know that you can count me out? Don't you know it's going to be all right? You say you got a real solution. Well, you know, we'd all love to see that plan. You ask me for a contribution. Well, you know, we're doing what we can. But if you want money for people with minds that hate, all I can tell you is, brother, you have to wait. Don't you know it's going to be all right? You say you'll change the Constitution. Well, you know, we all want to change your head. You tell me it's the institution. Well, you know, and here's the kicker line, you better free your mind instead. Don't feel shame. Don't feel hatred. That's shame pointed outwards. Transfigure. Become what you were meant to be. And when you become what you were meant to be, when you change your mind, then you can change the world. You know, we all love to comment on the emperor's fashions, but we all do it from a place of nakedness ourselves. Don't be ashamed. And it's weird to have to say that in a church, but churches have been in the business of shaming since time immemorial. The United Methodist Church this week did something quite horrendous. They ruled against being open to LGBTQ folk. That's outrageous. They used to have a wonderful slogan, and in fact, Barb Lloyd and I went down many, many years back to Nashville to learn all about it. Their slogan in the United Methodist Church was, "Open minds, open hearts, open doors." Well, I say that with this decision, that should be changed to closed minds, closed hearts, and closed doors. It's horrendous. But you know what? I wish it were atypical. Sadly, it's typical not only of Christians, but of all religions. I remember going back many years now, way before This Hour Has 22 Minutes, there was a great comedy group coming out of the East Coast called Codco. And two of the women, and I tried to find this clip on YouTube and on the web, and I couldn't. So I don't know whether it was Kathy Jones or Mary Walsh. It was one of them. Anyway, the skit was that one of them was a nun teaching in a parochial school in front of a group of lovely little girls, all of them wearing their uniform. And this nun pulls out a huge leather strap and whacks the desk. And she says, "Okay, so who did their homework?" Girls are all terrified, they're shaking. She said, "Come on, did you read the scripture?" Again, they're shaking. She says, "So what does Jesus stand for?" And slams the strap down again. And this time some of them are in tears, they're shaking, and one of them says in a little voice, "Jesus stands for love, miss. Jesus stands for love." That's what religion has done to the message of Christ. That's what it's done to many children and does to many children today, and we saw evidence of that this week. And we remember in the Beatitudes, which really set the tone for this whole season, that Jesus said, the sadder you are, the more hated you are, the more alone you are, the more different you are, the closer to the divine you are. It's not about fitting in and mixing in well. It's not about being like everybody else. It's about letting your light shine. That shows you actually are reflecting the divine. So what keeps us back is fear, the twin of shame. Remember, the two most important words perhaps Jesus ever said were, "Fear not." We saw two examples in politics this week of people who fear not. We saw Jody Wilson-Raybould, who had nothing to gain by speaking truth to power, but she did anyway, and the fallout is just beginning. And we saw Michael Cohen, south of the border, who had nothing left to lose, speaking truth to power. And again, will it cost them? Absolutely. It will cost them. Absolutely. But wasn't it radiant? Wasn't it beautiful? Wasn't it wonderful television? I loved watching that. When principles win out over partisanship, it's a beautiful thing in politics because it's so rare. You know, when power lies and the people in power lie, truth truly is revolutionary. But it starts here. It starts with us spiritually, having that courage, having that ability to do so. And it's not easy. When you look at the New Testament, really what you're looking at is a book of shame. It's the shame of the disciples who followed Jesus and didn't get it. Didn't get it. They fell asleep even in this transfiguration moment, most of them. They sold him out. They weren't there when he needed them most. And they didn't really get it until Pentecost, much, much later. And yet they were in the presence of the divine. And they still didn't get it. But what did they do? They wrote about their shame. That's the New Testament. They wrote the story of how messed up they were. They confessed. And they finally discovered that the real call upon us is not to mirror the world, but to let our light shine, our divine light shine, so that the world mirrors us. That's what the New Testament is about. And it talks about the other kind of shame, too, a shame that is warranted when we're really human, when we don't reflect the divine, but when we're all too human. That shame. What do we do with that? Well, as I said, if you turn it outwards, hatred, its twin is fear. But if you do what the disciples did, what constituted the beginning of the Christian church, if you do what they did, and you actually confess your inadequacies, your vulnerabilities to someone, if you show them both your bright side and your shadow side, you're giving them a gift too. You're giving them a gift too. Because there's nothing that is more a position of privilege and honor than to hear someone at their most vulnerable, to be there with them when they confess their inadequacies, when they truly pray in front of you. And I know it's scary. And so that's what prayer is for. We start with God and we work out to others. The great relief of admitting, as Paul does eventually, that there's something wrong with us, as well as something so beautiful about us. We can't let Corinthians go either. And this, sometimes Paul is such a guy. This is one of those times. I'm going to use a big word. It's called supersessionism. And that's what this passage is an example of. What supersessionism is when one religion says, we're better than another religion. And here, really what he's saying is that Jesus is better than Moses, that he's a bigger, better Moses. That really now we can set that aside. It's anti-Semitic too, even though Paul was a Jew. We can set all that aside because now we have Jesus. Forget about the rest. Well, the reality is Paul was an observant Jew, and so was Jesus. And without Moses, there would be no Paul, no Jesus. Without the Torah, there would be no New Testament. And perhaps, in forgiving Paul a little bit, because he is human, maybe it's the shame he also bore, because after all, he was a murderer of Christians for most of his life. So when we've done something truly shameful, when we make amends, it is a gift of another sort, too. Both our divine uniqueness and our shared humanity are what makes us truly beautiful. When I was a little girl, my mother wasn't perfect. I don't know any mothers who are. But this is one of her good moments, and it's one I remember really well. It's one of my earliest memories. She was a very beautiful woman, my mother, and she used to sit at her dressing table and make herself up. And I used to watch her as a little girl and just fascinated. And of course, she had all these vials and stuff on her dressing table. And so as soon as she left the room, what did I do? Little kids do. I got into her stuff. So I mixed up her powder with her perfume. I tried on her lipstick. You can imagine what the dressing table looked like after about 15 minutes of this. It was a disaster. And then, of course, I got frightened because she's going to find this, right? So I wasn't really being very good, but I was, playing the odds. I thought, well, if I go and talk to her and tell her what I've done, it's probably better than her finding out, because she's going to know who did it. So I went fearing the worst, and I told her what I had done with her stuff. And you know what she did? She laughed. And she hugged me, and she said, a moment of good parenting, thank you for being honest. Isn't it beautiful when we can thank someone for their honesty? Lent is a time to give up something. Here's a suggestion. Let's give up our shame. Let's give up our shame. Let's drop our veils. Let's let our light shine, or perhaps put our veils on. Let our light shine. Let's garb up in our tuxedo dresses. Let's change our mind instead before we look to changing others. And remember this, because the most important part of that song, Revolution, is the chorus. It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. Don't be afraid. it's going to be all right. If you do that, it's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. It's going to be all right. Be transfigured.